May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. There's a story in the Hebrew Bible, specifically in the book of Genesis, which tells the story of Jacob, later known as Israel. And he struggles with an angel. And Jacob will not let go of this angel until that angel will bless him. He wrestles the angel all night long. In the end, he does receive a blessing, but he also gets a bum hip for his troubles. This is how I feel with these two parables. We must hold on to them tightly and to refuse to let them go until they offer us a blessing. Mind you, we may get a bum hip for our troubles, but we may also be doubly blessed. I mean, let's be honest. These two parables are frustrating. They break all the rules. Sharing isn't allowed. Compassion seems lost. People are afraid of not being included. Some are kept out, and some are even thrown out. What kind of biblical stories are these? And we're left wondering, how do we make sense of what would appear to be nonsensical stories? How do we measure these tales with our understanding of a loving, forgiving, and welcoming God? And at a deeper level, we are even called to ask ourselves, what are we to do with other scriptures like these two that cause us trouble? We could certainly just ignore them, because certainly it is easier to jump over the scriptures that chafe us. But I suggest that perhaps we hold on to them for dear life and continue to try to see what they might offer us as we struggle with them. Because if we don't stretch and struggle and only engage with easy texts, then we're missing the fullness of the story. These stories were included for a reason. And I would say that sometimes it is from the most difficult parables that we receive the greatest gifts. Therefore, I believe that we must struggle on. We must refuse to let go of them or relinquish them without receiving something worthy from them aside from just fear and trepidation. And I think one of the problems with these particular parables is that we have a tendency to focus on the shut out and the lost, rather than to those who are found. We focus on those that are tossed away, rather than those who achieve entrance or are rewarded for their effort. We hold these stories with fear, rather than with the invitation embedded within them. And I think it's important that we remember that parables are meant as teaching tools, and not every idea in the parable answers every question posed in the world, but instead focuses on a few key concepts to try to make the ideas clearer and more understandable. These are not real stories about real people. No one was thrown out into the darkness, and no one had the door closed to the wedding banquet. So what is our lesson? What is meant to challenge us, to teach us? Why do we read these parables? I propose that it's possible that those that are locked out and kicked out are simply presented as a literary device to emphasize the good that is encouraged and hoped for, like the carrot and the stick. They're really not the threat that at first glance they appear. That is to say that the punishment in the story is not evidence that people are withheld from the grace offered, but instead simply used to further emphasize the benefits of behaving a certain way. These stories are stories meant to encourage, not to condemn. These stories show people only at one moment in time, at one place, and are by no means a full picture of any of them. Humans are far more complicated than that. So let us remember as we struggle with these texts that they are meant to clarify and help us to think about something. In this case, the building of the kingdom of heaven. In fact, you might have skipped right over that. In the very first phrase in the text, it says, "The kingdom of heaven is like." Now, you might be familiar with other stories and parables which begin with this phrase. For example, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but when he slept, his enemy came and sowed weeds among them. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of the seeds. But when it grows, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Or the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened. The Gospel of Matthew is flush with visions of the kingdom of heaven, and they are set there to help fertilize our imagination of a time to come, to encourage our own growth in the current time. The kingdom of heaven phrases help us to get a peek of the wonder of heaven and a peek into God's hopes and visions for the world, a peek into how we participate and co-create with God. So we must ask ourselves, what in these parables is worth hoping for? Not what happens to the one who is set aside, but instead, what do we see from the ones that are welcomed in? When we do this, our stories immediately alter. Instead of focusing on lack and fear, we focus on abundance and blessing. In the first parable, we are now drawn to the 5 bridesmaids who come prepared. These 5 bridesmaids are flush with oil. They have not only the oil in their lamps, but extra flasks of oil so that they will be prepared no matter how long it takes. They have oil for the expected arrival, oil enough for the delayed arrival, and still more oil just in case of emergency. That's a lot of oil. This is preparation plus some. Its abundance leaves us wondering, why so much oil? What is the significance of oil? Now, when I think of oil, I think first of oil as a medium of anointment. That is how the holy are marked, ready for service, like Samuel and Saul, King David, and the like. It is a physical sign of being chosen and blessed. I also think of 2 specific stories in the Hebrew Testament that relate to women in oil. Unfortunately, too often we consider texts in Scripture as independent pieces of literature, rather than writing which exists within a faith, which has other writings that sit around it that it relates to. That is, within a biblical story, or pericope as we would call it, it relates not just to the stories around it, but that we're supposed to know stories that came before it. And they might offer us a better vision. The closest way that I can explain this is that it's like the wolf, or sadly, the stepmother in our fairy tales. The character itself offers us a certain amount of expectation of what may happen in the story, even if you've never read the story. So I offer you the possibility that we should take into our wrestling match with these 2 stories, 2 stories that are from the Hebrew Testament, 2 stories that also include women and oil, and the prophets Elijah and Elijah from 1 Kings and 2 Kings respectively. In each case, there is a woman in trouble who receives the blessing of almost endless oil. In both cases, the blessing of endless oil came at a critical juncture and required the women to trust and obey, to believe that hope was coming because they had lost it. to believe beyond what the world around them told them. This oil was both a blessing bestowed upon the woman, but also an item which required their attention and action, even if it didn't make sense to them at the time. It was a participatory blessing. And so we should perhaps ask ourselves, not why do 5 bridesmaids not have enough oil, but perhaps the better question is, why do the other 5 have more than they need? All of them have some, but some have more. So all are blessed and have the capacity, but some have more. And so we have to wonder, what have they done in their lives to gain such abundance? Or perhaps, why did they bring it all with them? What inspired them to be willing to use all that they had, to be ready for that moment, for that bridegroom, for that wedding? I ask you, would you willingly use up all of your assets if God asked you to? Or would you, like the other 5, only offer what you thought was necessary for the moment? In the second story, from this new point of view, we turn our focus to the 2 slaves who found favor with their master, having doubled his money during his absence. This is even a more interesting proposal. What do you do when you are given something of value to hold on to? Like the bridesmaids, are you willing to use it up? I have to admit, at least I, and I would guess most of us, if we were given something of this great value, we would find a way to secure it, lock it away safely so that we could give it back in one piece when our master returned. But it is also true, it is that behavior is not the one that is praised. Those who receive the acclaim and the praise are the ones who use the money they were given, who go out and trade and share what they have with others, building the abundance such that it makes double its original value. They are honored for using what they were blessed with to create even more blessings in the world. And I think it's interesting that the translation of this unit of money that they have is a talent, because it invites us to consider that this asset may not be monetary. Perhaps our talents are those things which we do in the world, who we are, and what we can give, not just through finances, but through ourselves. And I would tell you that a single talent is not a small bit of money. Instead, it is an incredibly large sum of money. Some say that 1 talent is equal to over $1 million in the current market. And so again, we must ask ourselves, where is our hope in this story? What is the good news to be found here? I think first we see, just like in the story with the bridesmaids, that everyone is blessed to have oil. Here, everyone has a blessing. Everyone is given a talent. And not a little talent. Even the least of these has over $1 million at his disposal. Secondly, we are encouraged to use that blessing out in the world. No matter who we are, no matter what our talents are, we are called to use them in the wider world. We have to share it and multiply it. It reminds me of a song from my elementary school days. Love is like a magic penny. Lend it, spend it. You'll have so many, they'll roll all over the floor. That sharing and giving doesn't lead to lack. It often leads to abundance. We are to live in joy and generosity, knowing that it will bring dividends, rather than retracting in fear and in solitude, hiding ourselves away. with the blessings that we were given. Interestingly, while both of these parables are supposed to be about what the kingdom of heaven is like, the majority of the action in both of these stories occurs in the here and now. The real actors in the stories are not the bridegroom and the master. They are the bridesmaid and the slave. The bridegroom and the master react to the actions of the bridesmaid and the slaves. This makes me wonder about heaven itself. We often place heaven as that place we go to after we die. And yet, I don't know about you, I pray even stronger that the earth will be like heaven. And yet, we know also that God sent Jesus to teach us how to live in the way here on earth, not for some later date, but right now, right here. And we even know that in the book of Revelation, there is talk of a new heaven, but there is talk of a new earth as well. These stories remind me that there is work to be done right here, right now. Work that we are capable of doing. In fact, that work cannot be done without each and every one of us adding our part. These stories encourage us to bring our all. Each one of us has been blessed in more ways than we probably know, and we need to be willing to expend those blessings without regard for how they will be refilled, trusting that as we offer ourselves to the world, our oil will multiply in ways we couldn't have counted on, and our talents will bring back to us and the world more than we will ever expend. We need to leave the scarcity mindset and embrace the idea of abundant living, trusting that there will always be enough if we are willing to bring our whole self. Additionally, remembering that we are uniquely prepared and called for the service that God gives to us. Our blessings are not meant to be held close to the chest and reserved for some future date, but instead are to be used and multiplied. The master even promises in the second parable that to those who show and use and multiply their talents, even more will be given to them. We are the yeast in the leaven. We are called to assist in the inbreaking of heaven in this world. And this is the final part of the two tales. There is a component of unknown time. When will the bridegroom come? When will the master return? And in both stories, we are treated to their return. We recognize that not knowing when the return is, though, is partially the point. We are to live in this world, to use our resources, to grow our talents, to trust and obey God always. Not just when we think the master is about to return, but always. Living a life of discipleship means to live in each and every day fully. Not just when you think your account is going to be called up and audited, but each and every day. And this is not just for heaven's sake, i.e. that we might be locked out of heaven, because I frankly don't believe that's possible. I think God invites us all there. But for the sake of our lives here and now, because joy, generosity, trust, and caring for one another makes today better. It invites heaven here and now. What I came away from with these two parables is the kingdom of heaven is like when people live as if heaven were on earth, as if accounts were about to be measured and taken, as if the end were near, as if God depended on our participation in creation to make all things good again, as if our lives individually and communally depended upon it. Because it does. not because we'll be thrown into outer darkness or locked out of the banquet, but because we have received great blessings. And the best response to those blessings is to realize how special you are and how wonderfully you can add to the richness of this world. So I encourage each and every one of you to live into the fullness of the blessings that you have received. And may we all dare to continue to wrestle with these texts and with others, never willingly letting go until we receive the blessing that they might hold in them for us. Amen.